The world watched with bated breath as the long-simmering shadow war between Israel and Iran erupted into open conflict on June 13, 2025. Israel launched a massive aerial assault codenamed Operation Rising Lion, citing an imminent threat from Iran's rapidly advancing nuclear program. Israeli intelligence officials claimed that Tehran was on the verge of producing weapons-grade uranium at its fortified underground facilities, crossing a red line that Israel had warned against for years. This was not a decision made overnight. It was the culmination of years of escalating tensions, proxy conflicts across the Middle East, and a deep-seated conviction within the Israeli security establishment that a nuclear-armed Iran represented an existential threat that could no longer be deterred by sanctions or diplomacy alone. This dramatic military action was preceded by a series of clandestine operations deep inside Iranian territory designed to pave the way for the main assault. For weeks, Mossad, Israel's foreign intelligence agency, had been executing a sophisticated campaign of sabotage. They reportedly used a swarm of small, stealthy drones to infiltrate and neutralize key components of Iran's air defense network. These covert missions targeted radar installations and missile batteries, effectively creating blind spots and safe corridors for the incoming wave of Israeli fighter jets. The goal was to dismantle Iran's ability to detect and intercept the attack, minimizing Israeli losses and maximizing the element of surprise in a high-stakes gamble. The strategic rationale from Tel Aviv was clear: to surgically dismantle Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure before it became an irreversible reality. For years, Iran had steadily progressed in its nuclear ambitions, enriching uranium to higher levels of purity and developing more advanced centrifuges. Israeli leaders argued that the window for a conventional military strike was closing fast. They feared that once Iran possessed a nuclear weapon, the strategic balance in the region would be permanently altered, emboldening Tehran and its proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis. The decision to strike was presented as a preemptive act of self-defense, a necessary if risky move to prevent a far worse future scenario. The international context also played a crucial role in the timing of the attack. Diplomatic efforts to revive the nuclear deal had stalled, and patience in Western capitals was wearing thin. While no country publicly endorsed a military strike, the perceived failure of diplomacy created a vacuum that Israel felt compelled to fill. The Israeli government believed that it could no longer rely on international pressure to contain Iran's ambitions. This sense of isolation, combined with a firm belief in the urgency of the threat, pushed them to take matters into their own hands, setting the stage for a conflict that would quickly draw in global powers and shake the foundations of international security. The initial hours of Operation Rising Lion saw an overwhelming display of Israeli air power. An estimated 200 aircraft, including advanced F-35 stealth fighters, streaked across the skies to hit over 100 designated targets throughout Iran. The strikes were precise and widespread, aiming to cripple the very heart of Iran's strategic capabilities. Key among the targets were the heavily guarded nuclear facilities. The uranium enrichment plant at Natanz, where Iran was enriching uranium to 60% purity, suffered catastrophic damage. Similarly, facilities in Isfahan, responsible for centrifuge manufacturing, and missile production sites developing the K-bar and Qasem ballistic missile systems, were systematically targeted and severely degraded in a meticulously planned and executed opening salvo. The impact on Iran's military readiness was immediate and severe. A primary objective of the Israeli attack was to neutralize Iran's ability to defend itself from the air. The strikes successfully located and destroyed multiple Russian-made S-300 air defense systems, which were considered the most formidable obstacle to any aerial assault. The loss of these systems punched significant holes in Iran's defensive shield, leaving other critical infrastructure exposed to subsequent waves of attack. This tactical success was a testament to the effectiveness of the preceding Mossad sabotage missions, which had blinded and confused Iranian operators, allowing Israeli jets to strike with devastating accuracy and minimal resistance during the initial phase of the operation. The human cost for Iran's military and scientific leadership was staggering. The attacks were not limited to infrastructure. They were also aimed at decapitating the command and control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. Among the high-profile casualties were General Hossein Salami, the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, and Major General Mohammad Bagheri, the chief of staff of the armed forces. In addition to these top commanders, at least 3 other senior IRGC leaders were killed in the strikes, alongside several key nuclear scientists who were central to Iran's weapons program. This targeted elimination of leadership was intended to create chaos and paralysis within the Iranian regime, hindering its ability to mount a coordinated response. The effectiveness of the first wave sent shockwaves through Tehran. The scale and precision of the Israeli assault demonstrated a level of military and intelligence superiority that caught the Iranian leadership off guard. The destruction of their most advanced air defenses, the damage to their prized nuclear sites, and the loss of irreplaceable military and scientific personnel constituted a devastating blow. It was a clear message from Israel that it possessed both the capability and the will to dismantle Iran's strategic assets at a time and place of its choosing. The initial phase of Operation Rising Lion had achieved its primary tactical goals, but it also set the stage for a dangerous and unpredictable escalation. The world's worst fears of a widening conflict were realized on June 19, 2025. Reeling from the initial Israeli onslaught, Iran chose to retaliate in a manner that shocked international observers and dramatically raised the stakes. It launched a powerful Sejil ballistic missile not at a military installation, but at a civilian target deep inside Israel, the Soroka Medical Center in the city of Beersheba. The attack represented a deliberate and terrifying shift in the rules of engagement, moving the conflict from the military sphere directly into the civilian domain. This act was designed to sow terror among the Israeli populace and demonstrate that Iran could still inflict painful blows, even after suffering significant losses to its own military infrastructure. Fortunately, a full-scale catastrophe at the hospital was narrowly averted. Israeli intelligence had provided some warning of a potential missile attack, allowing for a partial evacuation of the sprawling medical complex. Most patients and staff were moved to reinforced shelters just before the missile struck. However, the impact was still devastating. The explosion tore through one of the hospital's main wings, and while fatalities were avoided, approximately 50 civilians, including patients and medical personnel who were unable to evacuate in time, sustained injuries from the blast and collapsing structures. The images of a modern hospital, a place of healing, being deliberately targeted, sent a wave of revulsion across the globe. The attack on Soroka Medical Center was immediately and unequivocally condemned as a war crime by Israeli officials and a large portion of the international community. It was a clear violation of international humanitarian law, which strictly prohibits the targeting of medical facilities. For Israel, the strike was a stark reminder of the nature of the regime it was fighting, one that it claimed was willing to flout all established norms of civilized warfare. This act of retaliation hardened public and political resolve within Israel, silencing many of the domestic voices that had previously questioned the wisdom of initiating a direct military confrontation with Iran. The attack on a hospital became a powerful rallying cry for the continuation of the operation. This single act of retaliation fundamentally altered the trajectory of the conflict. It provided a powerful moral and political justification for further military action, not just from Israel but also from its staunchest ally, the United States. The deliberate targeting of civilians was a line that, once crossed, made de-escalation almost impossible in the short term. Iran may have intended the strike to be a show of strength and defiance, a signal that it would not be cowed. Instead, it served to galvanize its adversaries, push neutral countries to take a side, and set the stage for a much more direct and destructive intervention from a global superpower. The missile strike on the Israeli hospital proved to be a decisive turning point, prompting direct military intervention from the United States. On June 21, President Trump announced that American forces had carried out devastating strikes against Iran's remaining nuclear facilities. This was not a limited or symbolic action. It was a massive display of American military power, marking the first overt U.S. attack on Iranian soil. In a televised address from the White House, the president stated that Iran's barbaric attack on civilians could not go unanswered, and that the United States would ensure that the regime would never acquire a nuclear weapon. The American entry into the conflict transformed it from a regional showdown into a global crisis. The United States deployed some of its most advanced weaponry for the mission. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, flying thousands of miles from their bases, were used to deliver powerful bunker-buster bombs designed to penetrate and destroy deeply buried targets. These were aimed at the nuclear sites at Natanz and the heavily fortified Fordow facility, which had been built into a mountain. The aerial assault was supplemented by Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from U.S. Navy submarines and surface ships positioned in the region. This combined arms approach was designed to overwhelm Iranian defenses and ensure complete destruction of the targeted sites. The results of the American strikes were swift and decisive. President Trump declared that Iran's nuclear facilities had been totally obliterated. This claim was supported by satellite imagery from the Pentagon, which showed massive craters and widespread destruction at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. Officials confirmed there were no signs of radiation leaks, suggesting the attacks had successfully destroyed the facilities without causing a major environmental disaster. The message was unmistakable. The United States had the capability to destroy any target within Iran at will. Following the strikes, the U.S. issued a stern warning to Tehran, making it clear that any further retaliation would be met with an even more overwhelming response. This direct American involvement fundamentally altered the strategic calculus for Iran. The regime was no longer facing Israel alone, it was now in direct confrontation with the world's most powerful military. While Iranian leaders publicly decried the attack as a declaration of war and vowed revenge, they were forced to weigh their next steps with extreme caution, knowing that further escalation could invite destruction that might threaten the very survival of the regime itself. The rapidly escalating conflict sent immediate and powerful tremors through the global economy. The most direct impact was on the price of oil, which spiked dramatically as markets reacted to the instability in a region responsible for a huge portion of the world's energy supply. The fear of a wider war that could disrupt shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz created a panic among traders, leading to the sharpest price increase in years. This surge in energy costs had a ripple effect, impacting everything from transportation to manufacturing and raising concerns about a new wave of global inflation. Investor confidence was also shaken, with stock markets in regional powers like India and Pakistan experiencing significant downturns due to their proximity and economic ties to the volatile situation. The international diplomatic response was fractured and exposed deep geopolitical fault lines. Many nations, particularly in the Muslim world, swiftly condemned Israel's initial assault as a flagrant violation of Iranian sovereignty and international law. Countries like Pakistan, Turkey, Egypt, and Jordan issued strong statements of denunciation. Even some of Israel's newer partners in the Gulf, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia, expressed grave concern over the regional destabilization, urging immediate de-escalation. These nations feared being caught in the crossfire of a broader conflict that could unravel years of delicate economic and diplomatic progress, creating a wave of instability that would threaten them all. In stark contrast, Western nations offered a more nuanced and supportive response. The United States, the United Kingdom, and several European Union members, while officially expressing concern and calling for restraint from all sides, largely framed their statements around Israel's right to self-defense against a hostile regime pursuing nuclear weapons. The Iranian missile strike on the Israeli hospital further solidified this position, making it politically easier for Western leaders to back the subsequent American intervention. This division highlighted the different security perceptions around the world, with many seeing Israel's actions as necessary, while others viewed them as a dangerous and illegal act of aggression that set a troubling precedent. In a move to rally international support and condemn its adversaries, Iran formally requested an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. Tehran's objective was to secure a resolution condemning the Israeli and American attacks and to portray itself as the victim of unprovoked aggression. However, this diplomatic maneuver was widely seen as unlikely to succeed, given the United States' veto power as a permanent member of the Council. The call for a UN session was less about achieving a concrete outcome and more about political theater, an attempt to win in the court of public opinion and isolate Israel and the US on the world stage, even as its military options became increasingly limited. As of today, June 22, 2025, the Middle East stands on a knife's edge. The immediate future is fraught with peril, with the risk of further escalation looming large. Iran, despite the devastating blows to its military and nuclear infrastructure, has continued to launch sporadic retaliatory attacks. It has fired more ballistic missiles and swarms of drones at Israeli targets, though many have been intercepted by Israel's multi-layered air defense systems, including the famed Iron Dome. Iranian leaders have publicly sworn that their strategic patience has ended, and that a stronger retaliation is forthcoming, framing their actions as a legitimate defense against foreign aggression. The world now waits to see if this is mere rhetoric or the prelude to another major attack. The human cost of this conflict is already significant and continues to grow. On the Iranian side, estimates suggest that between 200 and 400 individuals have been killed, the majority of whom were military personnel, IRGC leaders, and scientists. In Israel, the civilian death toll has risen to at least 24, with scores more injured from the missile and drone attacks that have managed to penetrate its defenses. These numbers do not capture the pervasive fear that has gripped civilian populations on both sides, nor the growing humanitarian concerns as the conflict disrupts daily life and threatens to create a new wave of displacement and suffering across an already turbulent region. The greatest danger now is that the conflict could spill over and ignite a much wider regional war. Iran has a powerful network of proxy forces including Hezbollah in Lebanon, various militias in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. A cornered and vengeful Tehran might activate these groups, opening up new fronts against Israel and its allies. An attack by Hezbollah with its vast arsenal of rockets would be particularly catastrophic for Israel, and would almost certainly trigger a massive Israeli response in Lebanon. The United States has moved additional naval assets into the region as a deterrent, but the potential for a miscalculation or a deliberate act of proxy warfare remains dangerously high. Amid the drums of war, the prospects for a diplomatic off-ramp appear vanishingly slim, at least for now. The direct military intervention by the United States has raised the stakes to a level where neither side feels it can back down without a significant loss of face. Any potential for peace talks hinges on Iran's next moves. If Tehran chooses to de-escalate and signals a willingness to negotiate on its nuclear program, a narrow window for diplomacy might open, perhaps mediated by countries like Oman or Turkey. However, if Iran opts for further military retaliation, it will likely trigger an even more destructive cycle of violence, pushing the region closer to the abyss of an all-out war with unpredictable and devastating consequences for the entire world.